Your Excellencies, Mr. Prime Minister, Ministers, EU Commissioner, FIC members, dear guests, welcome to Reality Check Conference 2015. We first would like to apologize for a bit of a delay in the start of the plenary session. The Foreign Investors Council organizes this event with a goal to bring together the business and the government and to openly discuss the current business conditions and to track the record of reforms. We aim to interact and agree on concrete steps that should be taken in order to improve the business environment here in Serbia and make it more competitive and business friendly. We invite a selected group of diplomats to note the dialogue, and we are happy that we also have the EU Commissioner here present with us today. The conference actually started earlier this morning with 4 parallel working sessions that covered specific regular topics. And we would actually would like to open this plenary session by hearing the conclusions of these working sessions as a feed-in for the dialogue within the plenary, but also further communication in the future. So, for the start, we would like to invite Mr. Mirko Kovac, who was chairing and moderating the working session on overall legal framework as well as on labor regulations, to hear the conclusions from this session. Mr. Kovac, please.
Thank you, Anna. Working session 1 was dedicated to the overall labor framework and the labor regulations. Improvements in the previous period were noted, primarily related to successful implementation of the labor law and the forming of the working groups for the change of the company law and bankruptcy law. The main topics discussed on the session were the foreign exchange law and the law on employment of foreigners. In the discussion, it was pointed out to necessary changes of the foreign exchange law, which would regulate issues such as cash pooling, netting, etc. FIC underlined its readiness to provide active support in preparation of the law changes. FIC members also indicated that more liberal interpretation of the existing law is needed. In the field of labor, it was underlined that the new law on employment of foreigners brought certain normative improvements by adopting 30% of FIC recommendations. However, in discussions, it was also pointed out to difficulties in administrative procedure for issuing of the work permits, where FIC expressed its view that the procedure should be significantly simplified. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirko. The second working session dealt with anti-illicit trade and food and agriculture, and actually focused on the new law on inspection surveillance. So we invite Bojana Obućina-Krčmar, who moderated this session, to tell us what they concluded.
Working session 2 was devoted to anti-illicit trade and sector of food and agriculture. The progress achieved in the previous 6 months was recognized, namely related to adoption of the law on inspection surveillance, somewhat more efficient fight against illicit trade in practice, as well as founding of the Department for Combating Illegal Trade of Excise Goods within the Crime Police Department. Implementation of the law on inspection surveillance was the main topic of the session, and discussion pointed to the key measures and activities which are precondition for successful law implementation. Prompt establishment of the coordination body and expert council for the risk analysis, strengthening the capacity of the current bodies, the adoption by laws and adjusting of sectorial law, as well as establishing uniform rules for undertakings of all inspections. Thank you.
Thank you, Bojana. The third working session covered the topics of taxes, leasing and insurance, and we invite the moderator Slavica Pavlović to share their conclusions.
Thank you, Anna. Working session 3 focused on taxes as well as the leasing and insurance sectors. Improvements made in the last 6 months were acknowledged, such as further development of electronic filing of tax returns, regulating tax violations through law on tax procedure only, as well as the adoption of the new insurance law, which was adopted with the inclusion of 40% of FIC key recommendations. In the area of taxation, the discussion indicated that inconsistent implementation of the same tax rules by the different tax authorities remains a key problem in the Serbian market. FIC members gave concrete proposals for improvement: strengthening of coordination between the Ministry of Finance and the tax administration, adoption of one bylaw for each tax form, introduction of policies and guidelines of the tax administration for all its affiliates, which would be publicly available, as well as the modernization of services for the taxpayers. In relation to insurance, the conclusion made here was that a thorough discussion between the National Bank of Serbia and private sector in the preparation of bylaws will be crucial for proper and consistent implementation of the new insurance law. Reducing discrimination between the composite and non-composite players through wider implementation of shared services, as well as switching from the tariff to underwriting model, were mentioned as the main topics. In the leasing sector, FIC highlighted the necessity of regulating the operating leasing.
Thank you, Slavica. Fourth working session combined two topics, real estate and telecommunications and IT, and we invite session moderator Ivan Petrovic to share their conclusions.
Thank you, Anna. Working session 4 was dedicated to the field of the real estate sector and telecommunication and information technologies. Achievements from the past 6 months were recognized, primarily related to adoption of the new law on planning and construction, which has accelerated issuing of the construction permits, as well as the implementation of technological neutrality and spectrum distribution to 1,800 megahertz in the field of telecommunications. In the area of the real estate, discussion evolved around finding a solution for conversion of right of use to ownership over land. Recognizing the significance of this issue, FIC recently sent to the government the proposal for its resolution, which was supported by the American Chamber of Commerce and NALED. The existence of recognizable and undisputable right on the property is a precondition for the new investments, and the participants agreed that the adoption of quality and implementable law on conversion is of the utmost importance. In the sector of telecommunication and information technology, FIC members asked for government assistance in eliminating the risk of potential new parafiscal levies and actions that led to revenue decrease. Also, a recommendation was given to apply a regional benchmark in the allocation of new frequencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. With this, we heard the conclusions of the all working sessions, and now we would like to give the floor to our host, FIC President Uwe Fredheim, to share the views of FIC.
Thank you, Anna. So, dear Mr. Prime Minister Vučić, Mr. EU Commissioner Hahn, Your Excellencies, Mr. Finance Minister Vujovic, Mr. Economy Minister Serbic, representatives from media and colleagues from FIC member companies. It is a great pleasure to invite you all here on the occasion of the FIC Reality Check Conference. And it is, if I may say so, a special honor to have such distinguished participants as we are having today. So please allow me to say that we are especially happy to greet Mr. Johannes Hahn, EU Commissioner for European Neighbourhood Policies and Enlargement Negotiations, as our special guest. I believe Mr. Hahn's presence here today underlines the Serbian government's focus on the EU accession process. Needless to say, harmonization of Serbian laws and regulations with the EU framework is also on the top priorities identified by the FIC. Having laws and regulations fully harmonized with the EU framework would enable necessary predictability and stability of business environments for both foreign and local companies. The purpose of the Reality Check Conference is to enable exchange of views between highest state officials and chief executives of the FIC member companies. Views on how we can co-create a sustainable macroeconomic and regulatory framework in Serbia, seeking an agreement on key initiatives and areas which are important for further improvement. So we have now just heard conclusions from the working sessions this morning, just a few minutes ago. Listening to those statements and observing what is happening over the last period of time, FIC is happy to state that we over the last 6 months have seen significant and tangible achievements in many of the areas that we are following. This has been the result of the dedicated work of the present government, and we talk about positive improvements of the business climate through changes of two important laws that we are pointing at. This is the construction law and the law of inspections. The new construction law is well implemented, and it has led to a shortening of deadlines in issuing construction permits. In addition to that, changes of the inspection law brought some improvements aimed at ensuring better coordination of the inspection services. Maybe in addition, very positive developments as well is coming from the successful implementation of the labor law, passing the parliament the last summer in 2014. Changes of all mentioned laws have been done in public consultation with the private sector, and FIC members were actively involved in the process. These are good examples, in my view, on how positive changes can be made in cooperation between the government and the private sector. I would now like to point out what are the main FIC expectations for the upcoming period. All of these expectations from FIC, we believe, points at activities that Serbia needs to carry out in its process of the EU accession. So in the presence of the EU Commissioner Hahn and the Serbian Prime Minister, if I may, state that FIC would like to suggest prompt opening of negotiations on accession chapters. We believe Serbia is ready for this move now, and the accession mechanisms will further strengthen the overall competitiveness of the Serbian economy. We have two main expectations when it comes to improvement of the business environment. First, we hope that the government will continue with harmonization laws and regulations with the EU framework, the EU acquis. Secondly, we hope for a better and faster implementation of the laws and regulations across all the sectors that often already has passed. Not to be too general here, maybe let me elaborate a little bit more in detail on maybe some examples of these two main priorities. So first, when it comes to the EU harmonization process, we have identified 5 priority areas based on the recommendations from the FIC sector committees. In example, the foreign exchange law, we recommend amendments of the foreign exchange law to enable, in example, cash pooling and expand possibilities for issuing guarantees for non-residents. When it comes to the law of charges, most important here is to create predictability for a business climate in order to safeguard from new para-fiscal charges. Then, already mentioned here today, the law on land conversion, significantly debated the law over the last few years. So the key here is still, and of course, to enable ownership of land. Fourth, law on personal data protection here to harmonize the regulation with the EU directives that exists. And finally, regulation of staff leasing, which currently is an area which is not regulated. In the second priority area related to then better implementation of laws, we believe this would be easier to achieve through public administration reforms and increased what we call administrative efficiency in the ministries and other state institutions, with maybe special focus on tax administration and inspections. Also here we have identified 5 main areas that require immediate governmental actions. Number 1, and maybe most important, and being discussed these days with IMF as well, the privatization process. Privatization needs to be significantly accelerated and organized in a transparent manner. After receiving letters of interest back in September 2014, the process is progressing too slowly. In addition to faster privatization, we believe that this is very important for the government in order to enable a level playing field both during and after the privatization processes. Secondly, the law on inspections, then to carry out the creation of this coordination body to enable efficient and consistent implementation of the new law. On tax, In the example, the tax administration does not always apply binding opinions from the Ministry of Finance, which is mandatory by the law. On the foreign exchange law, currently the law is rigidly interpreted, in our view, by the National Bank of Serbia, preventing transactions and activities which are not then explicitly allowed by the law. And finally, law on employment of foreigners, being today differently interpreted by the different involved institutions. So these are Ministry of Labour, National Employment Service, Labour inspections, and this is an example about requirement of different types of papers requested in order to get the work permit. This might sound like a small this administrative issue, but still it creates significant problems for maybe in special small and medium-sized enterprises. So coming towards a conclusion here, we at FIC are ready to support and continue to engage with the Serbian government and authorities. We are an association with actually the majority of our members originating out of the EU countries and with a significant presence in the Serbian marketplace. Today, accounting for more than 22 billion euros in investments and representing 18% of the GDP in Serbia last year, close to 100,000 employees. By being here, we know about the conditions in the Serbian marketplace, and based on the presence we have within the European Union countries, we can also relate to how things are working out there. We share most of the ambitions and priorities of the Serbian government, and we are happy to work together in achieving this. Having this in mind, I would again point out at the EU accession negotiations as the ideal mechanism for improving Serbia's business environment and competitiveness. Finally, in our view, the only way to ensure that the new current laws are possible to implement effectively and are supporting economic growth is to maintain the current active and constructive dialogue that we are having, I would say, between the government and the private sector, such as the one we are having here today, exampled by the Reality Check conference. Thank you very much for your attention, and then it is my pleasure to hand over to Prime Minister Vučić. Thank you.
Poštovani gospodine Fredheim, ja ću danas da govorim na srpskom, pošto sam poslednji put govorio na engleskom. Nadam se da mi nećete zameriti. Uvaženi komesar Hahn, vaše ekscelencije, dame i gospodo članovi Foreign Investor Councila, želeo bih da se pre svema zahvalim ljudima iz, kako mi to popularno kažemo, FIC-a, koji su uvek dobro razumeli napore, trud i težak i odgovoran rad koji smo imali u prethodnih godinu dana, a onda ću pokušati da analiziram poslednjih 6 meseci. Biću veoma kratak i neću ulaziti u sve detalje. Sve zakone o kojima ste pričali sa izuzetkom jednog mislim da možemo da donesemo. Oko tog jednog još ćemo morati da razgovaramo i da vidimo šta su interesi Srbije i možemo li to da izvedemo u narednom periodu. Ali želim da napravim jednu širu sliku. Kada u Srbiji kažete da ste za reforme i da je reforme neophodno da provedete, 95% ljudi će da kaže da, saglasni smo sa tim. A kada Srbima kažete šta su to reforme, sa vama ne ostane ni 5%. Zato što svi znaju kako bi drugačije, kako bi bolje, suprotno onome što kažu i MMF i Svetska banka i BRD i FIC i svi mi zajedno. Jer na kraju krajeva mi uvek očekujemo da nam nešto padne s neba, a ne sebe da menjamo. U prethodnom periodu pokazali smo jednu dobru želju da mnoge stvari u Srbiji promenimo i voleo to neko da prizna ili ne, mnogo toga jesmo izmenili. I ja sam posebno zbog toga zahvalan i gospodinu Bekefiju i gospodinu Fredheimu i gospodinu Knjeginjiću i Pitiću i mnogima drugima koji se nisu libili da iskreno, pošteno, otvoreno i odgovorno govore o tome u javnosti. Zato što kod nas prosto nije normalno da kažete da nekada nešto što je urađeno i nije baš tako loše. Ne samo ova dva zakona, već i mnogo drugih zakona koje smo donosili, a pre toga i zakon o radu, privatizaciji, stečaju, penzijama, plus zakon, kao što ste rekli, o inspekcijskom poslovanju i zakon o planiranju i izgradnji, u potpunosti menjaju naš poslovni ambijent. I ja mislim da, tu sam video gospodina Verheena, ja mislim da ćemo na svetskoj Doing Business listi ove godine porasti za najmanje 30, možda i 40 mesta, zahvaljujući velikim naporima i odgovornom radu u prethodnih 6 meseci. Naš posao je da napravimo najbolji poslovni ambijent, naš posao je da provodimo program koji smo dogovorili sa Međunarodnim monetarnim fondom i mi ćemo taj program nastaviti da provodimo. Želim da vas obavestim da je za prva 4 meseca u skladu sa dogovorom kojim smo napravili sa MMF-om predviđeni deficit u dinarima bio 72,5 milijardi, da je taj deficit 19,3 milijarde, da je Srbija danas po pitanju deficita, dakle Srbija ima takozvani primarni suficit, za one koji možda ne znaju, ne mislim od vas ekonomistova i zbog javnosti, šta je primarni suficit, to je kada odbijete prihode i rashode po pitanju kamata i kredita, dakle Srbija ima suficit u svom budžetu od 32 milijarde, dakle mi ovoliki novac trošimo zbog zaduženja koje smo pravili u prethodnom periodu. Kao što znate, imamo i kratkoročna zaduženja sa kamatnim stopama od 7,5 do 7,7%, što nijednoj vladi i nikome na svetu nije ni lako ni jednostavno da izdrži. Dakle, naš fiskalni deficit ispod nivoa Maastrichta je u ovom trenutku, teško da će na tome ostati, ali od predviđenih 4,75 mi verujemo da ove godine možemo da držimo deficit na nivou ispod 3,75. U najgorem slučaju držat ćemo ga ispod 4%. Mislim da je dobro i to što se procene rasta pomeraju iz -1 na -0,5. MMF mislim da će u ponedeljak da saopšti da menja svoju procenu na 0. Mi verujemo da svojim radom, i oni u to nisu uračunali efekte koje ćemo dobiti pokretanjem proizvodnje u recimo MSK u Kikindi, jer je tamo konzervirano sve, da ćemo imati veću proizvodnju u Azotari, očekujemo takođe i u Petrohemiji gde ćemo da rešavamo probleme u narednih mesec ili dva, da će Železara da ima dramatično veću proizvodnju, da će već u avgustu mesecu da ima pokrenutu i drugu visoku peć, tako da mi očekujemo i ove godine pozitivnu stopu rasta, da li će ona biti 0,2 ili 0,5 ili možda i više od toga, ali u svakom slučaju mislim da je to pravo malo čudo da iz recesije izađete u eri mera fiskalne konsolidacije koje provodite disciplinovano, odgovorno i ozbiljno. Verujem da ćemo biti u stanju to ove godine da uradimo i da ćemo imati značajno veći rast u 2016. i da ćemo uspeti da smanjimo deficit već u 2016. na maastrichtski nivo i verujem da je to nešto što će nas dovesti u red normalnih, pristojnih zemalja, dakle na nivou Evrope, i mislim da su to dobre vesti za građane Srbije. Ono gde ja vidim najveće probleme, dakle, to su problemi sa kojima će se suočavati ministar Sertić i to je problem privatizacije. I to je pitanje naše svesti, to je pitanje našeg licemerja koja nas vodi dotle da svaki put svako ume da vam kaže zašto plaćate Simpo, zašto plaćate Jumko, zašto dajete novac jednoj, drugoj ili trećoj kompaniji, a kada se bilo ko od njih pojavi na ulici da traži nešto što nije uvek zaradio, onda će svi to da podrže i da kažu vlada mora da nađe dovoljno para da to plati. I to govorimo svakom od nas. Prosto mi za to nemamo dovoljnu podršku, ide nam teško, borit ćemo se koliko možemo. Ja sam prihvatio sugestiju Međunarodnog monetarnog fonda zato što mislim da su suštinski u pravu, iako to nanosi veliku političku štetu i političkoj stranci koju vodim i vladi Srbije koju vodim, a to je da nećemo da odlažemo odlazak u stečaj onih kompanija koje su 10, 15, 20 godina neuspešne, koju isisavaju krv srpskoj državi i srpskom društvu. To ćemo da radimo samo u pojedinačnim slučajevima, mislim da je danas dogovoreno za 16 kompanija i to ćemo uredbama vlade da na poseban način regulišemo, tamo gde postoji šansa da se izborimo, ali mislim da će to da stvori zdravu ekonomiju, zdravu srpsku privredu i da će to da postavi temelje za još snažnije privlačenje stranih investitora. U tom pogledu za nas su sve konferencije koje FIC organizuje, a koje proveravaju naše rezultate rada uvek dobrodošle. Mi znamo da imamo još mnogo stvari da uradimo, govorili ste o efikasnosti državne uprave, nama tek predstoji do kraja 2015. i u celoj 2016. da provodimo reformu javne uprave. Krajnji cilj nije ono što nekoga interesuje da bi napakostio političkim protivnicima da govori koliko će negde nekoga da bude otpušteno, već koliko ćemo uspeti da popravimo efikasnost i efektivnost celog sistema i verujem da ćemo imati dobre rezultate po tom pitanju. Tako da, ja sam vama zahvalan što u Srbiji poslujete, zahvalan sam na tome što sa gotovo 20% doprinosite bruto domaćem proizvodu naše zemlje i u nama ćete uvek imati partnere sa kojim možete da razgovarate i sa kojim, čini mi se, delite najveći deo stavova. Da li smo mi uvek dovoljno brzi da uradimo sve ili nismo, ja želim samo da vam kažem da zakon o radu, dakle te 3 reči na srpskom ili 2 reči na engleskom, labor law, zvuče jednostavno, ali boga mi i neke zemlje Evropske unije nemaju tako modern zakon o radu kao što ga ima Srbija. Tako da mi smo to uspeli da izguramo u sve političke probleme i u sve teške političke posledice sa kojima smo se suočavali, kao i sa nekim drugim zakonima o merama fiskalne konsolidacije. Čini mi se da ne moram ni da govorim, pošto nikada u Srbiji niste imali, ako ćemo da budemo iskreni, ni jednu vladu koja bi to bila spremna da preduzme, ni jednu vladu. Teško da će biti i u budućnosti, valjda će da vide koliko je moj primer bio glup u političkom smislu, tako da ovo vreme pokušajte i vi da iskoristite i mi ćemo da iskoristimo da napravimo da Srbija bude bolje mesto i za investitore i da imamo neuporedivo zdraviju ekonomiju nego što smo imali do danas. Izvinite što sam vam oduzeo ovoliko vremena i hvala.
Thank you, Mr. Vučić. Serbia's strategic goal is accession to European Union, and FIC, as we heard, is a strong supporter of economic integration into EU. It is our honor that we have today as a special guest His Excellency EU Commissioner for European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations, Johannes Hahn. We invite Johannes Hahn to address the audience.
Thank you very much. Dear Prime Minister, Ministers, President Fredheim, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the Foreign Investors Council for organizing this conference. I think it's important to have this opportunity, and indeed, may I say, it could be a good example, a role model for other countries to have something similar and to organize events like this. I would also like to use the opportunity to pay tribute to the Council work, which is of great value for building a better business environment in Serbia. The figures speak for themselves. It was already said what is the impact or the influence of the Foreign Investors Council members to the Serbian economy, and the fact that more than 100,000 people are employed by foreign investors is already a very impressive figure. And I think this shows that Serbia has already the potential to attract foreign investors. Yet, since the beginning of the global economic crisis, the level of foreign investments in Serbia was reduced by half on average every year, and it is clear that reforms are needed to return to growth, and it was, may I say, very interesting and partly impressive to hear what have been the conclusions and assessments of the working groups and also the report by the Prime Minister. You have discussed these possible concrete measures in order to improve the business environment already today. And I know, Prime Minister, that your government is strongly committed to put Serbia's economy back on track. Today, I would like to stress that the European Commission and the European Union as a whole is here supporting your efforts. Improving economic governance and competitiveness to support long-term growth is one of the fundamental pillars of EU's enlargement policy. It is easy to see why. We want to ensure that new members are competitive inside the European Union. Today, Western Balkan countries import much more than they export. Unemployment across the region is very high. Poverty has increased significantly. This state of economy development makes the fulfillment of the economic accession criteria more difficult to meet. To tackle these challenges head-on, we have engaged jointly with the countries of the Western Balkans in a thorough analysis of their economic reform programs. The aim is to find agreement on what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. This approach very much reflects how similar challenges are treated by member states in the so-called European semester. As with the member states, our review of the enlargement countries' economic reform programs is not just a theoretical exercise. Implementation of the agreed reforms is key. Of course, the Commission can provide financial and technical assistance to facilitate the implementation of these reforms. Serbia, the EU member states and the Commission have now conducted the technical analysis of Serbia's first economic reform program. Together, we have agreed on the necessary reforms. They will be formally endorsed by the EU finance ministers on the 12th of May, but I can already share with you some insight on their conclusions. The EU welcomes Serbia's comprehensive program of economic reforms. This first set of measures has already produced encouraging results. Macroeconomic stability appears to be in place now and is backed up by the agreement concluded with the International Monetary Fund. Budget consolidation should be reinforced by the much necessary public administration reform. It will not only save public money, but also contribute to a more effective implementation of reforms. Part of the current reform of the public finances should generate savings which can be used for investments which stimulate economic growth. In this regard, our recommendation is to focus investment on the energy and transport network and support the Western Balkans and EU interconnectivity agenda. Just 2 weeks ago, the Prime Ministers of the region agreed that they would build a regional core network by 2030, linking all capitals and main economic centers. If properly implemented, these infrastructures have the potential to boost competitiveness and growth in the whole Western Balkan and in Serbia in particular. One of the main reasons why generating savings is so difficult in Serbia is the dominant influence of the state in the economy. The huge number of state-owned enterprises consumes a large share of the budget. I know, Prime Minister, you are fully aware of this situation. We discussed it several times, and this is the reason why your government is engaged in an ambitious program of restructuring and privatization of more than 500 state-owned companies. The finalization of this process is a key priority which the ECOFIN Council will underline next week. There are other factors that are putting a lid on growth and competitiveness. For instance, support to large foreign investments through subsidies has its limits. It can be very costly and result in an excessive dependence on a few companies. In turn, our assessment is that the private sector has the greatest potential in terms of sustainable jobs and growth. Though big companies are more often in the spotlight, one should not underestimate the importance of small and medium-sized enterprises. They are the backbone of the economy, and for a successful, thriving and competitive environment, you need to have the right mix of small and big companies in the different sectors of your economy. This is why it's important that these ordinary companies should be encouraged at a minimum cost to the state budget. This can be done, for instance, by facilitating access to loans, reducing red tape, or speeding up and simplifying the construction permit process. Putting in place measures with the potential of benefiting the whole economy is likely to take more time than individual measures, but it will lead to robust and sustainable growth, benefiting a large share of the population. With this in mind, the EU recommendation will focus on other areas as well. For example, we want to encourage the state and municipalities to better control the many charges that businesses must pay in addition to taxes. I hear from the Foreign Investment Council members that these charges are high and unpredictable. We are encouraging you to work with the private banks to increase their lending to companies, especially to SMEs. Businesses need the right skills, so it is very appropriate to associate them closer with vocational training schools. Finally, law-abiding businesses complain about the unfair competition from the informal sector. I know that the government already achieved some result in fighting the grey economy and should be encouraged to pursue its efforts. In this context, I would also like to underline the importance of the rule of law. A stable and independent judicial system is not only a fundamental principle for democracy, but it's also a necessary precondition for attracting foreign investors. It provides the necessary credibility and predictability that institutional investors are looking for. Some of the necessary reforms are socially and technically difficult. This is why all stakeholders need to be involved at an early stage. I cannot stress enough the importance of social dialogue in this process. There is also a role for you the investors, and it's a significant one. As a key stakeholder, the business community is a natural interlocutor with the Serbian government. You know the situation on the ground and can provide valuable inputs to improve economic governance. I am confident that the measures currently being put in place will improve predictability of the business environment, the rule of law, and the transparency of public policy. And I am looking forward to seeing you investing in Serbia and contributing to its recovery and to its accession path. And this is exactly why I'm paying a visit now to Belgrade to discuss with the government, the Prime Minister, what can and what should be done in order to allow us to start negotiations, hopefully already this year. But therefore it's so important to have your contributions, your support, but also your initiatives in order to participate in steering the country towards a further European perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn, for your recognition and support. Stable macroeconomic environment and transparent and predictable tax systems stand amongst main preconditions for sustainable business environment. We wish a warm welcome to Minister of Finance, Dusan Vujović, and invite him to take the floor and share with us the future plans of his ministry and the government.
Thank you very much. I'll take the opportunity to speak in English. The Prime Minister spoke in Serbian last year. We switched roles this year. Commissioner Hahn, Prime Minister Vučić, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, dear Mr. Fredheim, and all the FIC members, it is a great pleasure to be here. 1 year, my first meeting here was roughly 1 year ago. At that time, let me just recall a couple of numbers. We were talking about a deficit. We actually did not talk about the 90 billion deficit at that time. Today, we have a 20 billion deficit. This is more than 4 times less. This is half the Maastricht. We will probably not be able to sustain this till the end of this year, but we were next to last country in Europe last year. We are among the first 4 countries at the top, at least for the time being. This is not all. This is just the beginning. This just creates a first step in doing the reforms that we committed to do and obtain both the EU and the IMF support for. Growth prospects are better today than they were 6 months ago. We were talking about minus 0.5 decline of GDP. We are now talking officially, IMF with 0%, and this does not include potential upside that we can see if Smederevo steel plant, the chemical block, and other companies come on board, and if the 15 or 25 companies get successfully privatized. Total wages. We expected that fiscal consolidation will be recessionary. After 4 months, total wages are approximately the same, total wages in the economy. The reduction in wages in the public sector had been fully compensated by increase in wages in the private sector. Taxes on wages are at 100%, 100.1%. Contributions on wages are 99.7%. So we managed to completely avoid the recessionary impact of the wage and pension reduction, which was a necessary step in the fiscal consolidation on the economy, on the consumer demand, on the aggregate demand. And so these 2 views of the economy are perfectly consistent. Furthermore, processing industries are growing at about 3.5%, 4%. Not the whole industry. The whole industry is still down 2%, mainly due to mining and electricity power production, which were hit by the floods last year. There was a decline of about 20% in last July. We anticipate that by the end of this quarter, this will be fully compensated. It will be back on a normal growth path, which is what we need. Jobs and growth based on private sector development, as Mr. Hahn correctly stated, I think is the way out. In order to get there, we obviously need to continue with things that we spoke about last year and we continue today. And this brings us to the FIC precise, specific agenda. We thank you for your good work. We thank you for your good suggestions, for being pragmatic and being realistic as to what can be done and what is important for investors. Out of many comments that Mr. Fredheim already mentioned, let me focus on a few. Loan charges. And these are in the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance. Law and charges, we have a group that is preparing the concept of that law, and we will try and produce a consistent, transparent system that will put some 384 charges identified by NOLED into a consistent, active matrix that any investor can access on any internet site of the government or local government and know exactly what charges will be due, what will be the formula for their change, and what will be needed at what time in their project cycle. Second, we are also doing a parallel law on financing of local governments, where we want to introduce a system that will produce balanced budgets and will produce incentives at the local level to use resources efficiently and to contribute to the overall fiscal balance. Last big area that was mentioned here, and I'm grateful for very specific comments and suggestions, is the tax administration. We have a new director of tax administration. By mid-May, we will have the first draft of the tax administration. We have a resident tax advisor, and within a month or so, we will have something that is called transformation plan for tax administration that will be built on an action plan to implement a compliance-based, client-oriented tax system. We already had huge improvements in the tax collection over the last 8-9 months, both on VAT and excise taxes, but we would like to broaden the tax base and improve the way tax administration works, and we are grateful for the effort that we already have in place. Hopefully, by next time, we will be able to report much better coordination between the tax administration and Ministry of Finance, close all the gaps and follow-up that is needed
and significantly improve not only collaboration between the Ministry of Finance and Tax Administration, but also between the tax administration and all the clients, small and medium-sized businesses and large businesses that have that special large taxpayer unit. Last but not least, these are measures that are critical in developing an environment conducive to investment and growth in the coming months and years. And this is how I see the FIC role here. FIC is helping us prepare the grounds for the third generation of investment. Mr. Sertić will talk about the privatization as a way to do this. Let me just mention that in addition, we are doing deep reform of public enterprises, and these are the enterprises in power, in gas, in railways, and other infrastructure enterprises that will create the environment for investment. In addition, we are making, as Prime Minister already mentioned, making improvements in the business environment that will be recorded in this year's business report, but I hope that we'll continue to do this in the years to come. Last but not least, and this is something that we'll be discussing in a session that we have across the street here on investment planning, we are trying to improve the way we plan investment and we utilize public resources. Presently, we have systems that are not properly connected. We have projects that have been in implementation for years and are not producing results. We have roads that are missing in some of the recent requests, 700 meters to complete a section of 50 kilometers. We will be focusing on improving investment planning, on improving implementation, improving the use of both EU resources, other IFI resources, as well as our own resources. That will be the best way of creating an environment conducive for investment growth of the third generation. Let me just explain, third generation is the one that will capitalize on the comparative advantage of Serbia. The first generation were easy wins, selling the domestic market in tobacco, cement, and so forth. The second generation were investment projects that would benefit from good situation on the world market. The third generation are investment projects that will, in the long run, create Serbia as the hub for some investment projects with potential for regional and European growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vujović. Last but not least, we have with us today Minister of Economy, Mr. Željko Sertić, and this ministry holds a key role in creating a level playing field, both through privatization and also corporate legislation. So we kindly invite Željko Sertić to address the audience.
Hvala vam najlepše, poštovani predsjedniče, gospodin Hahn, poštovani ambasadori, predstavnici naših najvećih kompanija koje predstavljaju u stvari onu zaista ekonomsku žilu kucavicu Srbije. Mislim da ste imali prilike u poslednjih godinu dana da vidite da nijedna vlada u poslednjih nekoliko decenija u Srbiji nije toliko uradila za ekonomski ambijent i donela toliko konkretnih i pravilnika i zakona kako bi uspodobila i napravila pravu tranziciju iz onog socijalističkog načina dogovorne ekonomije ka jednom tržišnom sistemu. Pošto su i premijer i ministar Vujović pričali dovoljno vezano za okvirne stvari, ja ću se vratiti na ovu temu privatizacije, dati vam par informacija koje mislim da su vredne pažnje i da treba da znate zajedno sa svima nama i još par samo nekih napomena oko zakona koji su u pripremi. Koliko nam je važna privatizacija ne treba da pričamo, međutim to nije stvar odluke, nažalost to je stvar procesa. I premijer, i ja kao ministar, i svi ljudi koji su uključeni zajedno sa mnom u Ministarstvu privrede guramo taj proces najbrže i najbolje što je moguće, međutim on ima veliki broj okolnosti koje ne zavise direktno od nas, prosto sistem u kome živimo je takav. Ako vama treba 6 ili 7 meseci za transformaciju poljoprivrednog zemljišta u građevinsko ili za spajanje parcela ili prebacivanje na druge nivoje aktivnosti ili vam treba meseci da rešite problem sa poveriocima ili meseci da rešite problem restitucije, nekada čak i godinama, onda taj proces jasno je da je gotovo nekada predstavlja neizvodljivo. Međutim, sam proces privatizacije ne znači za ovih 500 i nešto preduzeća samo klasičnu privatizaciju. Dođe neka firma, dogovori se, objavi se javni poziv i bude firma privatizovana. Nažalost, mi smo najveće naše i najbolje firme i one što su imali neki potencijal do sada već prodali. Preko 3000 preduzeća u Srbiji od 2000. godine do danas prodato. Ostalo je 500 preduzeća, 500 i nešto, koje mi danas imamo, koje su ljušture. Najveći deo njih nema tržišni potencijal, za neke postoji mogućnost, ali uz određene uslove koje smo definisali zakonom. Na današnji dan, tačno u portfoliju Agencije za privatizaciju nalazi se 526 preduzeća. Do 1. jula ove godine imat ćemo rešenu sudbinu 338 preduzeća. Dakle, to je preduzeća koja smo već objavili u stečaju, koja su predata, dakle, sudovima. Imamo jedan deo preduzeća koje smo već rešili, imamo 10 obustava, imamo jedan manji broj preduzeća sa područja Kosova i Metohije koje ćemo rešavati u skladu sa Briselskim sporazumom, imamo deo preduzeća koji je po zahtevu Srbija voda zbog poplava koje smo imali prošle godine i značaja vodoodbrane prebačene na nivo Srbija, odnosno u procesu je prebacivanje u vlasništvo i u kapital Srbija voda. Imamo deo veterinarskih stanica koje čistimo iz portfolija Agencije za privatizaciju time što lokalne samouprave nam traže zahtev za povraćaj u njihovo vlasništvo. I zašto je 1. jul važan? Zato što nam tu ističe zakonski rok za rešavanje 72 medijska preduzeća. Dakle, 1. jula sva ona preduzeća koja ne budu objavljena, a ako neko objavimo, dakle, imat ćemo onda i rešeno i njegov status, bit će podeljen na radnicima. Ukoliko radnici ne prihvate to, bit će ta javna glasila brisana iz registra. Dakle, tačno 338 preduzeća je 1. jula definisano i ostaje nam za rešavanje 188 firmi. Nažalost, najveći broj od ovih 188 firmi će morati da prođe kroz neku vrstu ozbiljnih promena. Jedan deo kroz stečaj će moći da nađe svog novog kupca i da deo imovine ode na namirenje poverilaca. Drugi deo da, kao što smo imali i u ovoj situaciji, imali ste priliku da to čitate i u medijima u prethodnom slučaju, koliko je preduzeća iz stečaja kupljeno i na taj način vratio i deo zaposlenih, ali su nastavljene poslovne aktivnosti. Za jedan deo preduzeća, veoma važnih za državu, u razgovorima smo sa Svetskom bankom i Međunarodnim monetarnim fondom kako da obezbedimo da njihovo urušavanje ne utiče na ceo ekonomski život u Srbiji i to ćemo imati do ponedeljka vrlo jasno definisano i sa Međunarodnim monetarnim fondom i Svetskom bankom. Što se tiče samih zahvaljujem, želim da se zahvalim Savetu stranih investitora. Danas nam je dostavio svoje predloge na izmene zakona o ulaganju za koji je u stvari pre 2 dana završena javna rasprava. Mi ćemo u narednih 10 do 15 dana da zakon o ulaganjima predamo ministarstvima na mišljenje, nakon toga u redovnu proceduru. Imamo druge zakone koji su već ili u proceduri skupštinskoj, kao što je zakon o izmenama i dopunama zakona o standardizaciji. Ono što je bilo važno da napomenem, pošto je spomenuto ovde i Evropska unija, da smo mi 95% naših standarda u privredi upodobili sa pravilima Evropske unije. Na mišljenju u relevantnim ministarstvima nalazi se i zakon o privremenom ograničenju prava na obavljanje privredne delatnosti. U proceduru je usvajanje i zakon o izmenama zakona o sporazumnom finansijskom restrukturiranju, upravo kako bismo u budućnosti izbegli veliki broj stečajeva i rešavanja takvih problema. I pišemo zakon o regionalnom razvoju, o zanatstvu, o zadrugama i zakon o privrednim društvima koji nam je veoma važan upravo i zbog javnih preduzeća. Zahvaljujem se svima vama na dosadašnjoj saradnji, jer mi smo ministarstvo gde se najveći deo vaših ideja i sliva i rukovodstvu vašem koje organizuje sve ove poslove. Nama je veoma značajna vaša podrška i verujem da ćemo u budućem periodu održati ovako visok nivo komunikacije. Hvala vam.
Thank you, Mr. Sertić. We now invite the FIC President Uwe Fredheim to give an overview of the conference and give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Anna. We are on overtime here, so I will be brief. In FIC, we are very happy to see early signs of recovery in the economy. We are also happy to observe that we have a government with the will and the ability to push through reforms, today exemplified with the law of construction and the law of inspection. Still, I think we all agree that we have a job ahead of us, and we share that assessment of the situation. Thank you to the speakers here today, Prime Minister, EU Commissioner, and ministers. We hear commitment for further reforms, and we from FIC, we can assure you that we will show commitment, and we will engage in working together with the Serbian government in further improving the business environment here in Serbia. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, FIC members and delegates, to participating in the conference here today. Then, I don't know, Anna, is it you or me inviting now for some mingling? It's you, okay? Then I'm handing over to you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks. As Uwe said, thank you all very much, the speakers and the FIC members and the guests, for your presence. We invite you for the cocktail, which is organized in the hall, while FIC President and Prime Minister will provide statements to the media. Also, we encourage all participants to evaluate this conference. You have received the evaluation forms. Please fill them out and leave them at the box in the hall. Thank you very much.